It has been widely reported this week that HS2 will spend 3 years and almost £100 million closing sites where work never even started on phase 2 of the project. You'll remember that former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak canned phase 2 that was originally supposed to connect Birmingham with both Manchester and Leeds. But that's not even the worst of it. A report from the National Audit Office further reports that HS2 had spent £592 million on buying land and 1,000 properties along the route that it will no longer need. Yeah. And now, admittedly, that is nothing compared to the cost of the bits of the project that are going ahead. It was originally estimated that HS2 would cost the UK taxpayer £37.5 billion. Current estimates suggest that the final cost will be £67 billion. I'll save you the maths, almost double. But at least with that part of the spend, the nation was actually going to get something. And it still will, hopefully. But the purchase of that land and the cost of shuttering sites that were never actually opened will cost almost £700 million, and we will see nothing in return. What does that tell you about the nation's procurement processes? Do we really just have a blank check for these things? Well, reading a little further through the Audit Office report, it says, although works are on schedule, HS2 Limited has not driven the cost performance it expected through its contracts, and contractual incentives to control costs and improve productivity have not worked as intended. It added that HS2 is now looking to renegotiate its 4 main construction contracts to better incentivize cost control and achieve greater certainty on costs. However, the Department for Transport and HS2 Limited acknowledge that successfully renegotiating major contracts that are already in progress will not be straightforward. Why wasn't this a prerequisite before the project started? There was so much talk before works got underway for HS2 that it would set new construction standards, that it would create a huge number of jobs and apprentice opportunities, and that it would raise the bar for environmental practices as well. But clearly, no one thought to ask just how much all of that might cost. Now, there's more to say on all of that, but I'm going to pause for a moment and go and have a look at the chat because we've had a couple of comments coming in. Let's see what they are. Going back to Chris Ford, my teacher said I'd never get anywhere by looking out the windows, having driven a lorry. I beg to differ. I think if you're driving a lorry, it probably pays you to look out the window as well. Jim Turner, completely unrelated to our news headlines, missing out on the smell of soil vegetation when stripping topsoil and the smell of rotting vegetation when opening a soil hay back. You'll not get that working remotely. Well, you can actually. You can, and I for reasons I have no idea why they did this. When I was at not the last Con Expo, but the one before, there was a company there who had a dust suppression system that they were showing off, and they had. It's not a flavour because that would be wrong, but they'd actually added a smell to the mist that they were sending out, and they claimed that it smelled of dirt, and they were encouraging people to go and have a sniff, and it did. I mean, I guess if you're making that claim, you kind of need to come through with the actual thing. But yeah, there was a mist, and it smelled of dirt. You could have that pumped directly into your office. Not entirely sure you'd want it done in mist form because obviously that would tend to bugger up the electronics. But yeah, that is possible. I wonder if that's a thing. We've already talked about on autonomous machines, or more specifically on machines where you've got, or electric machines rather, where you can add sound, you can add engine sound, basically to warn those working around you, but also those within the machine. They can actually hear the changing gears and that kind of thing. So adding smell, why not add smell? Just a thought. So yes, going back to our news headlines. So having seen just how much money had been pissed up the wall by the UK government, HS2 and the various main contractors working on the project, I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper. A very quick internet search said that the UK is the most expensive country for construction in the entire world. It also says that even by UK standards, London is by far the single most expensive city in which to undertake construction work of any kind. And then I got into the real meat of things. The A14 Cambridge to Huntington improvement scheme that was completed in 2020 cost approximately £1.5 billion for roughly 34 kilometres of road. That's a cost of around £44 million per kilometre, which already sounds excessive. A similar project in Germany, the expansion of the A1 motorway between Cologne and Dortmund rather, cost a total of over £1 billion. But that was for 73 kilometres as opposed to 34. The A1 in Germany averaged at £13 million per kilometre as opposed to £44 million on the A14 in the UK. And all of this is not actually specific to just roads. The Crossrail project in London, which has now been renamed as the Elizabeth Line, cost more than £18 billion to cover an entire distance of 73 miles. The Grand Paris Express, a comparable project in France, cost around 30 billion for 124 miles. Again, save you getting out the calculator, that's roughly twice the price for roughly twice the distance, which, first glance, appears fair. However, Crossrail included the construction of 10 new stations, while the Grand Paris Express project gave the French taxpayer 68 new stations. All of this begs the question, why? Why is the UK construction so much more expensive than elsewhere? The geology and terrain of London and Paris, very similar, both heavily populated, extremely busy, both face the same planning and environmental challenges. And be honest, you guys work in construction here in the UK. Do you feel like you're being overpaid at all? Do you think anyone in the UK construction is being overpaid? And yet, time after time after time, the UK tops the league for the cost of its construction. Of course, going back to the beginning of this discussion, spunking 692 million and getting nothing in return on HS2 doesn't help the final bill. But unfortunately, this seems to be pretty typical. It also makes me wonder about the nation's procurement practices. Clearly, estimated costs aren't worth the paper they're written on. As soon as work gets underway, there seems to be endless reasons to increase the cost and, in many instances, extend the construction time too. Think about that from a domestic standpoint. If you wanted a new drive or a new path at your house, you'd get in a handful of let me try that again. You'd get in a handful of quotes and then go with the one that offered the best mix of cost, professionalism, timescale, and everything else. And let's say they plan, the people that you'd agreed the job with, they plan to do the work for 2,000 quid and told you it would take a week. What would your reaction be if it then took 6 weeks rather than one, and they hit you with a bill for 5,000 quid rather than the £2,000 you'd agreed? Now, we supposedly have professionals controlling the nation's purse, and I bet we're paying them pretty handsomely too. And yet they spend the taxpayers' money, our money, freely and seemingly without scrutiny. Incidentally, did you know that Buckingham Palace has been undergoing renovation and restoration for the past 7 years? Neither did I. I'm not invited around that much anymore. That has cost the nation £369 million. £369 million for something most of us will only ever see from the outside. £369 million that we're paying for the richest family in the country to live in. Yeah. Chris Ford says, the lunatics have taken over this island. What a song that was as well. HS2 was a total waste of time, and it was using 200-year-old track dimensions when the opportunity arrived to update everything. Haven't we been there that before? What was that not the case with the M25? The M25 was kept in planning for so long that originally it was designed as a 2-lane, basically a dual carriageway, right the way around the outskirts of London. And then it suddenly dawned on people that actually that design was done in the late 60s, and we didn't build it until the 80s, by which time most families had 1, 2, possibly even 3 cars. So as a result, it opened and then large portions of it sat unused because they were being widened, and there's been widening and extending programs going on pretty much since the day it actually opened. Chris Ford says, I'm sat here getting depressed when you hear what other countries can do pound for pound. What the hell is wrong with us? He kind of says. And I mean, I mentioned the fact that our geology is the same, our terrain is the same, but also our materials are the same. you think about cement. A lot of the cement that we use, we're importing from overseas. Well, the French will be, unless the French have got their own, they'll be doing exactly the same. A lot of the materials that we're bringing in, the expertise that we're bringing in, all of that, the French are doing that, the Germans are doing that, even the Swiss and the Dutch and everybody else is doing that. And yet when we get to here, it's more expensive. Why? Why is that? Why is that? And somebody mentioned here on the show just a few days ago that apparently to build, I wish I could remember the size of the house they were talking about, but somebody mentioned the fact that it costs about £67,000 to build a new house. So let's just say that's a 2-bedroom house, from start to finish, 67 grand. Depending where you live, I mean, if you take where I live as an example, and I admittedly do live in an expensive part of the country, that 67 grand two-bedroom house would probably set you back $500,000, give or take. Where is that additional coming from? It's not going to the construction workers. Their wages are lagging behind the cost of living, just the same as every other form of people here in the UK. So where is the money going? Well, I mean, it's obvious where it's going, isn't it? It's going into the coffers of major construction companies. And yet it is them that are, I mean, they have failed. What did the report say? I'm just going to go back up my notes here. Let's get to the right bit. Yeah, although the works are on schedule, HS2 has not driven the cost performance it expected through its contracts, and contractual incentives to control costs and improve productivity have not worked as intended. Now, pretty much since HS2 started, we have been kept informed as a nation of escalating costs. So I don't know how many years we're into this now. I think it was given the royal assent around about 2008, 2009, something like that. So, we are a good 15, 16 years into this. So after the first year, you would have thought that somebody overseeing HS2 would have said, we put in place these cost performance controls and contractual incentives to control costs, and yet our costs are escalating. Stop now. Let's all have a bit of a chat about this. Instead of which, we carried on and we carried on and we carried on, and here we are. Here we are. We've doubled the cost of the overall project. We've wasted nearly 700 million quid on land and properties that will never actually be worked on. And 100 million to close sites. Now, I realise that some of these sites will have had a bit of work done on them, and we've got to do some sort of refurbishment or reinstatement, that kind of thing. But 100 million to fill a few holes. Is somebody taking the piss here? Chris Ford says, I thought it was about 75k to build a house. How wrong I was. Even if it was 75k, even if it was. And as I say, I mean, I do live in a very expensive part of the country. But even if it is 75,000 quid, I don't know. Chris, I'm going to take a wild stab. 2-bedroom house up in your part of the country. What is that? 250k? I'm guessing. I don't know property prices in your part of the world. But if let's be at, I tell you what, let's even say 150,000 quid. So there's a complete 100% profit on every house that's being built. Any other country would have had it done by now. I blame a lot of inexperienced operators, useless ones that don't do much production every day, and a lack of tech. I can't argue with that, but shit flows uphill, surely. We were told, and I was sat in on various meetings about HS2 even before royal assent was granted, and they were talking about how they were going to, they were going to insist on low emission machines, and the whole thing would be done by a huge fleet of 700 ADTs. They'd gone into the absolute detail of exactly how it would be built. They did lots and lots of pre-construction testing on the stability of the ground and various places, and all of the things. They went through all of that, and yet the bit that has upset just about everybody is cost. And somewhere along the line, whether it's HS2 Limited, the overarching part of the project that is overseeing the four main contractors that are working on it, or the government through Department for Transport, surely, once a year, once every 6 months, somebody should have said, okay, how are we doing? And if somebody came back and said, well, actually, the cost has doubled. If somebody said that to me, I mean, just as an example, my car has gone in, well, my wife's car has gone in for a service today, and it's going to cost, I don't know, maybe 300 quid, something like that. The car's only a couple of years old, so I'm not expecting anything else major. But if they came back and said, we told you 300, it's 600. Hang the fuck on. You told me 300. Where have you got the other 300 from? I always say that politics is basically human life writ large, and I use it a lot when I'm talking about migration, and I'm sorry if I'm boring you with this, because it's an analogy that's kind of logged in my head. If my next door neighbor knocked on my door and said, my wife or my husband is beating me up, can I come in your house? I'd invite the lady in, give her a cup of tea, and phone the police, because that's what you do as a human. If you are negotiating, the construction of a wall or a path or a new driveway or a new patio area in your back garden, and somebody says it'll cost you 5,000 quid, and then they try to charge you 10, having taken twice as long to do it, you're going to have a word, aren't you? You are going to have a word. Jim Turner, even more on cost. Hoping to get my new house sorted for under £25,000, but I'm planning on converting 2 site offices because I'm a tight bastard. But that's the point. That is the point. We have got economists and procurement professionals who should be, bearing in mind they're spending our money, Chris's money, Steve's money, Jim's money, Gary's money, my money. I want them to be tight bastards. I want them to fucking nail the contractors to the wall. £1 million for filling in a hole on your bike, pal. We'll get somebody else to do it. And I don't care how much that upsets you. That's what you want. Is that not what you want from your procurement department? If not, what the hell are they doing? Are they just sat there handing out blank checks? How much to fill in a hole? £100 million? Yeah, it seems reasonable. Which begs the question, is that kind of thing happening because we've got people in the positions of power heading up HS2, heading up transport, Department for Transport, that have never actually got their boots dirty, that don't know how things work? Think about, I keep coming back to cars. You know that thing that, if you took your car in for a service, MOT, repair, and as a bloke, now let's use Jim. Jim's a fairly big fella. If somebody came out and started, we found something wrong with your flange pin, your phalange. You've got a problem with your phalange. Jim would probably say, "Yeah, all right, mate, fuck off. Get my car sorted. Give it back to me, and I'll pay you what I said I was going to pay you. Simple as." If you're a little old lady and you find yourself in the same situation, you've taken your car in and you get back there and there's Wayne comes out, "Oh, sorry, love, I've had a look under the bonnet and, well, you're supposed to have 6 phalanges and you've only got the one, so we've had to replace them and it's going to cost you £1,000 each." Little old lady's going to fall for that. Do we have little old ladies in charge of procurement in the construction industry? Or more specifically, at government level that is dealing with. And is the construction industry looking at it and going, "Oh, we've got some mugs here. Fill in some holes, tell them 100 million. They bought it. Wow, happy days. Let's go and have a party." Yeah. Steve says it's the same with football. If they play shit, blame the manager. Same with construction, really. Maybe. But again, the using that analogy, in football, it is generally the manager's job to assemble the team. So if he's assembled a shit team, he should bear some of the blame, shouldn't he? Chris says the figures of £700 million outlay for land and property should be reclaimed through their sale as land values have risen, unless the old brown paper envelopes come into play. What happens? And I mean, I don't know. They purchased, apparently, according to this report, they purchased 1,000 properties. Now, I don't know what the state of those properties are. Have they been demolished, for example? Have we done compulsory purchase orders along the route of the intended second phase of HS2, demolish the houses because, based on the experience with the first phase, demolition was years ahead. When I was looking at demolition down at Old Oak Common a good couple of years before work started on HS2 proper. So have those houses been demolished? Well, for one thing, we've lost 1,000 houses. We don't have enough houses in this country, and now chances are we're now going to have to pay somebody to rebuild or build new houses where we already had 1,000 houses. So that 100 million or the 572 million, whatever it was, that we spent on land, we're now going to have to spend more to rebuild houses where we've already knocked them down. The costs just seem to go up and up and up. Chris Falls says, not my money. I haven't got any. Know the feeling. They get a big budget and buy it and spend it like nothing at the start. Then near the end or the middle, they're like, fuck, we should have done this or not spent that. Yeah, absolutely. And listen, I understand the will to try to set new standards. I said this when we were doing the London 2012 Olympics. There was lots of rules and regulations put in place on the construction of the London Olympic Village and everything else. So they basically took current standards and moved them forward. And I understand that. And HS2 gave us the opportunity to do that. I went down to the HS2 site at Old Oak Common for the demolition. And I've already told you, I can't remember the name of the course. If it comes to me, I'll come back to it. But in order to go and take some photographs and to shoot some film, we had to apply weeks in advance, and then when we got there, we had to go for a blood and urine test to be checked for drugs and alcohol and everything else. Now ours took, I think, from start to finish, probably took about 2 hours. If you are a construction worker, somebody's actually going to get their hands dirty and do more than just wave a camera about, that induction, going through your medicals and everything else and the site induction, a whole day. Whole day. What are we looking at the cost of a construction worker for a day in London? A couple of £100? How many people were employed on HS2? I don't know, 10,000 maybe? So 10,000 times £200 just for the inductions. See where the money's going? Jim Turner says other people's money is always easier to spend, and it's even easier if you've just taken it off the taxpayer. And the taxpayer, I mean, this begs another question, and I don't know if anybody else has ever had this. Not this house. This is an old house, but when we bought a house off plan, obviously we were required to pay council tax. That's the way these things work. And we had a bill for our first year of council tax, and it itemised things that we were paying for, and it was things like refuse collection. We didn't have refuse collection because our house was built ahead of time. The road hadn't been adopted. We were paying for road repairs, so we were having to gather our waste up, take it to a central place, and then it would be picked up. There was no, I mean, when we first moved in, there was no road, but the road was about 3 years away from being adopted. But we were paying for the verges that hadn't even been created to be maintained and everything else. We don't ask the questions, do we? And with HS2, we've kind of done it twice. I think from day one, when somebody said that we were going to spend £37 billion on a railway line that probably 80% of the UK population will never ever set foot on, that, I mean, I think it did raise a few questions. But then when Rishi Sunak came in and said, we've decided to scrap a large part of it, should we not have been, well, hang on a minute, we've already spent upwards of 40 billion quid or whatever it might be. is that really a good idea? Should we not just see it through to fruition and get our money's worth? Nope. He just woke up one day and said, "Nope, put the kibosh on that." Um, Chris Ford says, "I've always spent other people's money as it's my own. Perhaps it's where I've gone wrong in life." Maybe that's why you got no money, Chris. I know the feeling. A lot of the ladies they grabbed will end up being sold to developers, so the government will be quids in, and the owners will have been royally fucked over. I can see some big court cases coming up in the next few years. So, court cases. Let's talk about court cases, shall we? Going back to the Competition and Markets Authority, it's something we reported extensively. So, 10 UK demolition companies were charged or fined 60, well, just shy of £60 million for basically bid rigging and price fixing and various other bits and pieces. The projects upon which that fraud, for want of a better word, had taken place were made public. Some of them were for things like there was a high court in London, there was a police, I think it was a police academy or something. So that has come out of the public purse. So the CMA has levied fines against those companies, rightly. There's been half a dozen or less director bans and so on down the line. Why have we not, as a nation, pursued those companies for the difference between what the job should have cost and what we ended up paying because of that collusion? And also, I mean, I'm doing this from a UK taxpayer point of view. I'm also doing it from a UK government point of view. But there were other projects. There were other projects where private companies have clearly, demonstrably paid over the odds because there was collusion and price fixing and everything else. Yes, those involved should have been fined. Yes, those that were very, very closely linked to it should have received director bans. But what about the money that was lost? If there was a demolition project that should have cost 4 million quid, but because a bunch of companies got together and elevated the price so that they could weigh each other out, rather than costing 4 billion or 4 million rather, it cost 6. I'd like that £2 million back, please. That's how much you ripped me off for. I'd like that money back. Why hasn't that happened? Now, I realise, that the cost of bringing a court action is very, very high. But, you're talking about tens of millions of pounds that have been lost either to private developers or to the UK taxpayer. Class action? Get everybody together and go after them to get the money back. Is that not an idea? You may have lost 1,000 houses, but have gained plots to build 2,000 houses that are more ecologically biased and energy efficient. Yeah. And that will cost an absolute fortune. Jim Turner says it was an elaborate land grab from day one. I'm inclined to agree. Steve says, see, instead of best operator challenges, I personally think more should be done on day where college people and others wanting to give construction a go and get a feel of small machines, big machines, how to set out foundations, read drawings, maintain the machines, rather than grown adult trying to put shapes in a hole like the kids' tour you had back in the day. Personally, I think they're focusing on the wrong thing. It's an interesting one. Brian has just joined us. Young Brian has just joined us. That only works if the money is there to get back. It's a good point, Chris, and I take that on board. But and I bearing in mind, I work very closely to the demolition industry, and some of the companies that were caught up in that, I have huge respect for. Some of the people that were caught up in that, I have huge respect for. But since the CMA investigation was made public, since that near £60 million in fines was levied, virtually, with one notable exception, virtually every one of the CMA 10 has gone on to make huge increases in turnover and profitability. The money's there. Don't make no bones about it. That money is there, no question. And if somebody decided I'd like to claw my money back, bearing in mind that the investigation has already been done, I can prove that these companies added £2 million to my demolition project. I'd like that back. bang to rights as far as I'm concerned. You know, what court in the land is going to overturn the findings of a government agency that has already successfully prosecuted? Really? There is another bit to today, because, you know, while you're ranting, you may as well carry on. Just going to get back to, let me get rid of a thing from my screen because I've got another thing to show you. Bear with me for 2 ticks just while I do this. It is this. You can see it on my screen there. So Construction Inquirer today says nearly 3/4 of construction firms want to scrap the training levy and the CITB, according to a major new survey. The research was conducted by Survation and commissioned by payroll giant Hudson Contract, who are already embroiled in an ongoing legal dispute with the CITB over levy payments. So let me just put this in a frame. As I'll come on to in a second, more than 1,000 companies have actually been surveyed here, but please bearing in mind that the reasoning or the driving force behind this survey is a company that has already got an ongoing legal dispute with the CITB. So take that in consideration when you listen to the rest of it. A total of 1,042 companies responded to the survey, with 74% of those currently paying wanting to scrap the levy and the CITB. The results come ahead of the CITB's levy-raising powers expiring, when it'll have to go out to the industry for consensus later this year to get approval to continue charging the levy which raised £170.6 million in the last financial year. Hudson is calling for the CITB to be stripped of its levy-raising powers and absorbed into the new Skills England training body. Now, we mentioned the Skills England. My article yesterday was about that, about the idea of stacking one quango on top of another, which personally, you know, bearing in mind we've just spent the last half an hour talking about the cost of bureaucracy and mismanagement of funds, so you know where I stand on that. My concern with this, having been here before a number of occasions, I've been writing about the CITB for more than 30 years. Once every 3 years, I think it's every 3 years, they have this thing called the consensus. So that construction companies, just to be clear, construction companies of a certain size are required to pay into the CITB a training levy, and then they supposedly spend that money to redistribute and train up the industry. So you're paying money in, but supposedly you're getting good people out. Well, in all the time I've been writing about the CITB, we've had a skill shortage, so that part of it isn't working. More recently, we've had instances of the CITB spending money with social media influencers to try and encourage young people into the industry. That didn't work either. They then spend some of their levy money on things like reports into gender diversity and migrant labour and all that. That's not what the CITB was ever supposed to do. It is called the Construction Industry Training Board. It's not the Construction Industry Spunk Some Money Up the Wall Board. It's not the Construction Industry write some reports every once in a while board. That's not what it's there to do. What it's there to do, you pay in, you pay money in, and supposedly you get competent people out. The problem is, as I say, for 30 plus years, I've been writing about this. So I've probably watched or reported on maybe 10 consensuses. Is that the plural of consensus? There have been 10 consensus schemes run during my tenure as a journalist, as a reporter. Every single time, and I do mean this, you know, absolutely truthfully, every single time in the run up to it, everybody says, yes, the CITB, no longer fit for purpose. Quite clearly wasting money. We have a skill shortage that they're not addressing. They've wasted money here. They've wasted money there. They're not controlling competence cards. You know, they've tried to sell off the crown jewels like the Bertram Newton training facility. They are clearly not fit for purpose. We need to scrap them. And then the consensus rolls around And a couple of days later, you get an announcement from the CITB saying, we're delighted to report that the industry has backed us once again. Here's our mission statement for the next 3 years, which is precisely the same as the mission statement for the previous 3 years, which is exactly the same as the 3 years before that. We will work to address the skill shortage. All right, we will cut our costs. Will you? Every single time, and I'll bet a pound to a penny, right? There's 1,042 companies mentioned in this report. I can put it back up on the screen. 1,042 companies mentioned in this. That's almost 3/4 of the industry representative currently wanting to scrap the levy and the CITB. I can't remember when the consensus is, but I will lay a pound to a penny that they get the gig again. Regardless of the formation of Skills England, I reckon we will see exactly the same thing again. I think it's fear. I think it's fear within the industry. I think that the industry seems to work when it comes to voting on the consensus. They seem to work on the basis of better the devil you know. Yes, we could scrap the training levy, and yes, we could scrap the CITB, and yes, we could go with Skills England. How much is that going to cost? Is that going to work any better? What will we have to do to status quo? Not the band, the situation. Better the devil you know. We'll stick with what we've got. Chris Fall says, let me get rid of that. Chris Fall says, like the episode of Blackadder where Sir Percy offers to lend Edmund his secret stash, only to be told, seen it, found it, and spent it. Yeah. It'll be a different name, same old shite. I don't even think it'll be a different name. Really don't think it'll be a different name. I think we'll pop out the other end of the consensus, and the only difference will be that the CITB will continue, but it will now report to Skills England rather than the Education Ministry or whatever it might be. Tear the training business model down and totally rework it. Again, you Steve's already said it, you've said it, Chris has said it, and I'm saying it. We've got an unaddressed skills shortage, and those people that are coming into the industry, they've got a piece of plastic that says they're competent when we all know they're not. It is quite clear, completely evident that the system that we have now, the regime that we have now, does not deliver. It doesn't deliver enough people, and those people that it does deliver are not sufficiently competent to just work. They don't hit the ground running. So even if you've paid into the levy, the training levy, as a company, the people you're getting out, you're still going to have to invest lots of money to get them up to speed, because the people that are coming out of those training schemes are not hitting the ground running. So we can clearly see in no measurable way is the CITB or the training levy actually working. And yet, as I say, my guess is the only difference will be CITB gets the go ahead, but it will now be reporting to Skills England. Steve says, well said, Mark. I just, one of the things I find hardest about this job is bearing in mind what I do, I'm just sat out on the edges looking in. I'm on the periphery. I don't work in construction. I don't do construction. I don't do demolition. I very rarely get my hands dirty. I very rarely get my boots dirty. But it is so evident what's going on. I've mentioned the CMA. When that came out, nobody in the industry went, oh, collusion, bid rigging, price fixing, surely not. The entire industry went, surprised it's only demolition that have been called out on it, because everyone else is at it. The notion of brown envelopes, we talk about it regularly on this show. Does anyone think that's gone away as a result of the CMA investigation? I certainly don't. When you're talking about training, I've got a piece of plastic here that says I'm competent. I've got a brain here that says you're probably not. We can all see that. So why is it that the powers that be can't? And I keep coming back to this. My feeling is that a lot of this is because the people that they're employing, the Construction Leadership Council, which is the conduit between the construction industry and the government, I think that's run by suits that have probably never got their feet dirty, or if they did so 30 years ago. All they do now is attend meetings. They have no real notion of what is going on at site level. and they make these pronouncements. Oh, we've introduced a new card that will signify this. Yeah, fine. Do you really think that's going to do it? Do you really? And at the same time, I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day. Competence cards are one thing, and I have my own personal issues about competence cards. But how about this? In demolition, you are required to do an asbestos awareness course. Now, we all know what asbestos is. Most of us, I think, know what it looks like. You've got a pretty good idea of where you're likely to find it and what to do should you find it. In other words, there's some asbestos there. I'm leaving. Get the experts in to get this sorted out. So we all know that. Okay. Asbestos was put into buildings in the UK and around the world for decades as a fire retardant. But we ultimately realized, actually, this stuff's horrible. It will give you mesothelioma and a bunch of very, very unpleasant cancers of your lungs, and you will die from it. Plain and simple, you will die from excessive exposure to asbestos. You will die. So as a result, there was a window of asbestos usage. I can't remember exactly, but I think we stopped using it late 80s. So we know all of that. So the asbestos that we're dealing with today, and will continue to do so for some decades, is exactly the same as the asbestos that we dealt with last year in 2023. It's also the same asbestos that we dealt with in 2013, in 2003, in 1993. You have to update your asbestos awareness card annually. Now, personally, I've had a driving license for, I'm going to take a wild stab, at about 35 years, give or take. I was a late bloomer when it came to driving, but I've had a driving license for 35 years. Now, over the course of my 35 years of driving, cars have got faster. We've now got hybrid cars, which I drive. We've also got electric cars. We've got ABS braking. We've got sat nav. We've got all of these things. All of these things. I've only ever had one driving test, despite the fact that the surroundings, everything about driving these days, smart motorways and all of these things, all of the landscape of driving has changed. But my test from way back when in the late 80s is still valid. And yet, asbestos, which is, as I say, it's the same asbestos that we first discovered was really, really toxic 30 odd years ago. You have to update your card annually. Why? You remember that guy in the marble video that I showed you earlier? I don't know what it meant over in Italy, but here, money. It's not, asbestos hasn't changed. The way we deal with it hasn't changed. The way we identify it hasn't changed, and the risks from it have not changed. So why do we have to update our asbestos awareness training annually? To line the pockets of the training organizations. Simple as. Steve says, why not go back to how they used to? Apprentice operators opportunities. They wanted to make more money, then put another day onto the course and cost to train the people on the likes of new tech or how to maintain your machine. Why isn't there someone like yourself and us that can see it, but no one at the CITB sees the issue? Ivory towers is my take on this. If you were to ask the average working person, and Steve says a lot about this, Jim, Gary, all of you guys, you say a lot about this. If you were to, if I were to come to you as a not as a journalist, but as a representative of the industry, and said to you, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the industry? And it wouldn't be GPS and the advent of electric machines and the future of hydrogen. You would be saying we don't have enough skilled people doing the job. We're not attracting enough additional people to maintain it, and we're losing a lot of people through retirement and being pissed off with the card scheme, frankly. We can all see that. And the only reason that the people at the top of the industry, CLC and beyond, can't see that is because they don't do that. They don't do that. They have these little meetings among themselves where they basically talk around in circles. And is there any incentive for them to change? Is that is the CITB itself going to say, our bad, we're really rubbish at this, we're going to call it a day? Or are they going to continue just milking the cash cow and driving their fancy cars and using their fancy offices and producing their pointless reports because they're being paid to do so? Is there any incentive whatsoever for them to bring the CITB, the trained levy, and the training system into the 21st century? I don't believe there is. Steve says, you do your operative touchscreen, it's telling you about scaffolding. Same questions over and over, very non-relevant. Yeah, the course I mentioned on HS2, there was a bunch of guys, and it was purely guys. There was no women at all, were required to attend a meeting on PMS, post-menstrual stress, or premenstrual stress rather, not post, premenstrual stress. So in other words, if you're working with ladies and once a month she gets a bit shirty, you're aware of it. How is that of any use to anyone on HS2? How is that of any use? How do we make our voice heard? Yeah, I don't know. It's at this point that I always have to say exactly the same thing. The only solution that I can think of is unionisation, and frankly, unionisation comes with its own issues as well. If you think these big companies and these government departments are bureaucratic, try dealing with a union. They're not much better, to be frank. But when you've got, I don't know, 2.5, 3 million people employed within an industry that has so much wrong with it, and let me be clear, it has so much going for it. It employs some really smart people. It does some amazing things. But there is so much wrong with the industry. 3 million odd people can see what's wrong with the industry, but rather than speaking to the 3 million, 20 or 30 people sit around a table at Build UK or the Construction Leadership Council and say everything is right with the world. The figures for the industry are up and to the right. I've just got my £300 million bonus this year. I've got an MBE or an OBE. Everything is right with the world. They're not living in the real world. It's academics running things. They can't begin to understand. That's why everything is fucked. Jim, I can't argue with that. Families have suffered by asbestos, wives washing husbands' clothes. Yeah, absolutely right. I'm just trying to remember the lady's name. There was a lady that I used to speak to on LinkedIn on that very basis. Her husband died from mesothelioma because he was, dealing with asbestos, and she was washing his clothes, his overalls and everything else, and she contracted it, and she died about 3 months ago as a result of that. So absolutely right. So true, says Steve Williamson. Dan Cullen says all these people are bothered about getting more money and not bothered about what us working men do. All they want to do is strip us of our wages to get more cards for another job to be done. Yeah. And listen, we could talk around this in circles, and we're already an hour and a half into this, but there's another thing. I've mentioned this before, and I will mention it again because it just blows my mind. We have a skills shortage, and one of the reasons we have a skills shortage is because we are very, very bad at getting new people into the industry for one reason or another. And you can blame the youth of today for being lazy and work shy, or you can blame our inability to show all that's good about the industry and attract some smart people into it. So we have a skill shortage. You would have thought, based on that, if you had a skill shortage, you would do everything in your power to keep those already employed, incentivize them, offer to upskill them to make them even more valuable, and just basically try to retain for as long as we possibly can, either directly employed or as mentors for the future generation. You would have thought that as an industry, we would bend over backwards to keep the good people that we already have. Instead of which, somebody decided grandfather rights. Toss that out with the bathwater. So all of these people that have been doing this job for 10, 20, 30 years, every single day, 5 and 6 days a week, they can show you a complete back catalogue of all the projects that they've worked on to show you exactly how skilled they are. But now, no, they will definitely need an NVQ. Why? Why will they? Imagine somebody knocking on my door now and saying, "Yeah, you've been writing about construction and demolition for 35 years, but we think it's about time you did an NVQ." For what? What is an NVQ going to give me? Is it going to make me a better writer? Is it going to make me a better broadcaster? Maybe it would. Is it going to make me more knowledgeable, more understanding? No, it's not going to do any of those things. All it's going to do is line the pockets of the training organisations that are delivering the NVQs. It's not doing anything else. Don't be fooled. Asbestos awareness is a money-making exercise. Do it once, you've done it for life. If you're already doing the job, you should not need to prove that you can do the job, because you are. Be honest. All of you guys, by and large, have got employers. If you were really crap at your job, if you abused the machines, if you were using too much fuel, if you were clouting dumpers while you were loading them, how long do you reckon your boss would tolerate that before he gave you your marching orders? Half an hour? An hour? Max? An NVQ? If it was a private company or smaller, they would have been goosed a long time ago, says Steve. A shit operator on a training site will get the same card. Wrong in a shit op and a good operator on a training site will get the same card. Wrong on so many levels. I know this is something that Jim has touched on. If you're going to do a card scheme, have a starter card scheme. I don't know. Here's a yellow card, just to ring the chase. Here's a yellow card. Bit like your provisional license when you're learning to drive. Okay, so you've got a card. You've shown that you can get in a machine and out of a machine without hurting yourself or anyone else. You know where the levers are. You know roughly what the levers do. Right, now you've got a year or whatever. You've got a year. We will monitor you for that entire year. Through either manually, visually, with people stood by you and your fellow workers, or we'll use technology, telematics, or whatever it is to monitor your performance. And when you've done that, you will then get your green card, which says you're good to go. I'm making the colours up as I go along. Bear with me. So you're now good to go. But now you want to go from the excavator that we've been monitoring you on, over to a dozer. Steve said he'd like to have a go on a dozer. If you want to go on a dozer, you get a yellow dozer card. You prove that you're half reasonable on a dozer, then you get your green dozer card. That should be the only difference. There shouldn't be, red, white, blue, purple. I can't think of any other weird, scarlet and ochre. I may actually be making colours up now. Why? Why have we got that? Chris Ford says, life's all about money, how much you can amass without breaking into a sweat, or to get other people to give you their hard-earned cash, whether it's overpriced food, beer, cars, etc. Just a fact of life around from year dot. Doesn't make it right, though, does it? Doesn't make it right. And going back to the cost thing with HS2, when you see that, and I know we what do we refer to as rip off Britain? I think Britons are pretty aware of the fact that we are rip off Britain. I was in Italy earlier this year, and you go out for, and bearing in mind how good Italian food is, you go out for an Italian meal with my good lady wife, and we had a starter, main course, sometimes a dessert, bottle of wine or half a bottle of wine because she's the only drinker, and I was spending, I don't know, 30, 40 euros. Do that here in the UK, double that, if not more. And it's everything. As I say, my wife's car service today, it's going to end up costing me 300, 400, 500 quid, I guess. What's it really worth? Jim Turner says, I can cure the skill shortage nationwide without costing hardly anything to the taxpayer. I haven't got the time to type it, but I'll tell you next time I see you. See, he's almost a broadcaster. You see, this is what we do. This is exactly what we do. Cliffhangers. I couldn't possibly tell you, but tune in for the next exciting episode of Jim Turner Speaks. Any young ones wanting a ticket should get a discount, like half price. A lot of them see the price and think, sod that. Or give them info on how to get an apprenticeship machine operator. Yeah. Or moreover, should we as individuals be required to pay to work? Think about it from both sides of this. So imagine you're a school leaver or a college leaver. So yes, you may have had your little part-time job, your paper round or cleaning cars or whatever it is that kids do to make money these days. But you're not exactly rolling in cash, are you? You know, if you're 16, 17, you're not rolling in cash. You may well be coming to the party with some form of student debt. So you're not holding folding, as the saying goes. Is it right that if you're in that situation, you should then be required to pay in order to start work? And then look at it from the other side. If you have been in employment and for one reason or another, you have found yourself out of employment and you now need to be re-employed. So let's say you've been laid off, right? If you've been laid off, chances are you too haven't got a huge slush fund kicking around. You haven't got a war chest of money. You're probably on your uppers. You're desperate to work. Should you really be required to invest 500, 1,000, 1,500 pound just to get a little bit of plastic that suggests you could do the job you're applying for? Steve says 2 curries, 1 naan bread, 1 beer, and 1 water with my daughter. 55 quid. That's expensive. And bearing in mind, Steve's not exactly in an expensive part of the country. You know, you do that down here. 2 curries, 1 naan bread, 1 beer, 1 water. I reckon that's 70, 80 quid where I am, roughly. Steve says, charge a small price for a yellow card, brings more interest and they get more money. We all win. Yeah. Yeah. Lower the barrier to entry. And I don't mean that from, well, no, I kind of do mean that from a skills point of view. If you are a yellow card holder, and again, I'm making these colours up as I go along. If you are a yellow card holder, you are required to do only certain things. We're not going to have you working on an open carriageway, for example. We're not going to have you working right alongside the general public. We're going to, you know, for the first 6 months or 12 months or whatever it might be that you hold a yellow card, we'll have you working basically over on your own. You'll be training alone. You know, you'll be loading dumpers and, you know, generally doing the things, doing a bit of trenching and that kind of thing, making sure your lines are straight and everything else. But you will be kept away from harm's way, both for yourself and for those working around you. And only when you have built up the expertise will you be allowed to go into the wider world, and then a bit wider still. Chris Ford says, jobs for the boys. I'm reaching boiling point. I could almost swear. Feel free. I've already had a go a couple of times. Steve says, red card versus blue card SVQ 2 is no different to the operators. You don't get more per hour or have a blue card or red card. Pointless money-making scheme. That's all it is. It's all it is. And, you know, if we're talking incentives here, so going back to a yellow card analogy, you get let's say you get a yellow card and that gives you, I'm going to make the figures up. Let's say a yellow card grants you 10 quid an hour because it's a nice, easy figure to work with. 10 quid an hour, you do that for 6 months, 12 months. And, you know, you gradually get better and better and better. And at the end of your 6 or 12 months, somebody says, well, you know, we've been watching you. We've been watching the telematics. You haven't caused any damage. You're quite clearly learning. We're going to move you up. We're going to move you up. You now get the green card, which means you can work on these other projects or these other bits of projects. And your £12 an hour is now £12 an hour. And 6 months down the line, really impressed with you. You've gone from green to purple. You've got the purple card now. You're on £15 an hour, £20 an hour, whatever it might be. So if you're a young guy, particularly, young guy, girl, you're thinking about starting a family, or you've got your first place with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever it might be, and you're looking at thinking, if I keep my nose clean, if I really, take on all the learning opportunities that I can, then quite possibly we could come out of this. I'm on the career path, I've got long-term employment, and I've got a transferable skill. So if the missus at some point says, do you know what, I'm really fucked off with the UK, should we go and live in Australia? You can say, yeah, look, I've got a bunch of cards here. I'll walk into a job in Australia. Yeah. We all came up with great ideas in 30 minutes. 30 minutes as opposed to 30 years. How about that? And it would encourage young ones to do well, to earn well. Is that not what we all do? That used to be more or less how pay rises worked. It wasn't a case of once a year, I'd like some more money. Oh, yes, you can have some more money, or no, you can't. It was, in the past year, I've done this, I've done that, I've done that. Quite clearly, I have improved my skills. I've got my points and everything else. I can demonstrate the fact that I am more valuable as a member of the team. Therefore, I expect to be remunerated for it. Is that not how it works? Steve says, if I left school today, I want to be a machine operator, I want an apprenticeship and cars, etc. Where and how? Because I wouldn't have a clue now. And I, bearing in mind, and I realise once you're in, I guess you start to forget what went before. But you are a very active part of the industry. You know what car does what, and if you don't know and you're in the industry, what hope is there for those that have never actually set foot on a site? Where would you begin? Unless somebody comes to your school, which apparently is highly unlikely, unless somebody comes to your school and says, this is demolition or this is construction, this is the pay you'll get, these are the cards you'll need, and if you're interested, you go to this website or you fill in this piece of paper, and we will set the wheels in motion. Yeah. Jim Turner says, sacking people that aren't worth their money or who aren't interested works wonders too, and it G's up the other slack people too. Yeah, it does. But, rather than NVQs, we basically have the ultimate NVQ. If you arrive on site either as a complete noob, complete rookie, or as somebody that's got 10 years under your belt and you are clearly not very good, as I say, you're causing damage to the machine, you're revving the tits off the excavator you're driving, you're using too much fuel, you're operating in a dangerous or erratic manner, everybody alongside you will spot that in 5 or 10 minutes. And you will be given your marching orders, or you'll be told, if you happen to land on a particularly welcoming site, they might give you the opportunity to improve your ways. But if you don't improve your ways, you're down the road. That is the ultimate NVQ. That's the ultimate sanction. If you're not good enough, fuck off. Steve says, has anyone been refused on a site because you don't have an SVQ? If anybody can answer that, I'd love to hear from you. But I do think it is almost time to bring this baby into land, because we're nearly at the 2-hour mark. In some ways, good. That was kind of the idea of this second part of the show in the first place, was to broadcast for longer and to address some of these things. Have we fixed things? I don't believe we have. But it does make you wonder. Not that I'm expecting the entire industry to set aside their entire weekday morning to listen to me droning on, or to listen to you guys and with your input as well. But this is public domain. This is being broadcast live onto LinkedIn, as an example. LinkedIn, where the industry leaders hang out. They can't say they don't know. All of the faults that we have, are there if you choose to look for them or to look at them. We know this. The very fact that we have 670 odd people taking their own lives in a single year, that is in the public domain. I have to question why the wider media haven't picked up on that. That's a whole other story. But that is in the public domain. It's on LinkedIn, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter and YouTube. It's there. Are they not looking, or are they looking and choosing not to do anything about it? Every time there's an accident, and we've seen a spike in accidents and fatal accidents over the past 12 months, that's in the public domain. It's right there. Surely you would think that somebody like the Construction Leadership Council, Build UK, or any other one of these organisations would say, I think we need to look at this. We can't have 50 people dying in a single year in this day and age. We can't have 700 suicides in a year. We need to look at it. We can't spunk £100 million filling in a hole. We can't spunk £570 million buying properties and then not doing anything with them. It's there, and it's public. They are choosing not to look. And Steve says one long show per day is perfect. Glad you think so. Glad you think so, Steve. Right, okay, people, go and do your thing. I've got to go and do some bits and pieces. Got to prep for my meeting with Komatsu, which, for those of you that weren't here earlier, that explains why I'm wearing this hat today. There's method in my madness. I'll tell you more about it after the meeting. I'll be back tomorrow. I don't know whether there'll be another one of these extended things tomorrow, because I don't know what I'll have to rant about. Jim Turner says too many folk in our industry who aren't interested and don't give a fuck. What I find weird about that, and this will probably see us right the way through to 2 hours. What I find weird about this is quite simply this. If you are a leader of this industry, whether you are in a trade organisation, or more specifically, if you are working for a major contractor, and even if you are one of these people that sits atop Lang O'Rourke or Balfour Beatty or Mace or something like that, and you're pulling with bonuses 150 million quid a year, my guess is you'd probably want to keep that going. And in order to keep that going, you need people to keep the wheels of your business or your trade organisation going as well. Surely it is in your best interest to make sure that we have a constant flow of new, skilled, competent people to keep your coffers filled with cash and to keep you in the manner to which you're accustomed. Surely. What's happening with Komatsu? I'm due to speak to Komatsu later today about Mine Expo, basically. Trying to do something with Mine Expo or Komatsu while we're at Mine Expo. I'll fill in the gaps when we don't know if we're doing it yet, so I'll fill in the gaps after that. I won't have them with me, so the crowd I work for don't put anyone like them with me because they know it'll get on my nerves. And they might be ringing me around for a new seat. Yeah, indeed. €1 a pint in Tenerife. Can't wait. How much is it's a while. It's a while since I bought a pint. How much is a pint these days? £6, £7, something like that. Am I in the ballpark? As I say, it's been a long while. I'm completely guessing that. What I do know is the last time I attended an NFDC meeting, people were bitching about the cost of a pint of what's the Italian beer? Can't remember. Big tall glass. Can't remember the name of it. And I was sort of chuckling up my sleeve, thinking I don't care because I'm not buying it. Peroni, that's the kiddie. They were pissing and moaning about the cost of a pint of Peroni. I went up and got myself half a pint of Diet Coke, and it cost me £8. Very fancy London hotel. Is that a good way to spend money? Personally, I have my thoughts on that, but that's a whole other thing. Anyway, that's 2 hours. People, go and have a fantastic day. I realise it's a week or two away, Gary, but look forward to that point. I think you'll have deserved it by the time you get there. Listen, I could probably do one by myself. I've been talking for 2 hours now, so everybody, go and set the world to rights with your tails up and everything else. I'll be back tomorrow for the usual bit. Maybe some of this. We'll see. See how it goes. Till then, everybody, have a good day. See you soon. All the best.